Hello everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm essentially going to be doing my reading wrapped for 2024. We are going to look at some of the stats I tracked this year, talk about some of my favorite and least favorite books, and then to end off I wanted to do kind of a looking forward section talking about my goals for 2025. So with that intro out of the way, let's get into the video. So I use a spreadsheet that was created by With Ali / Hardback Hoarder here on YouTube. I've used different versions of her spreadsheets over the last couple years, and I did the paid version that she had on Etsy last year for my 2024 spreadsheet, and I think I'm going to just reuse that same spreadsheet and rename it and kind of reformat things for 2025 as well. But I wanted to go through some of the stats that were tracked through that spreadsheet. I'm going to put a little image up here of the stats. So this year I read 76 books. I read 1,479 pages and listened to 391 hours of audiobooks. And according to this, I had 3 rereads, which I do think is correct. And it also says that I acquired 41 books. I think this number actually might be slightly lower because I think there was definitely a couple books in my transaction spread of the new books that I bought that I did entire series when I got them all at once. So it's probably closer to 45, 46 new books I bought this year. I also wanted to show you the graph for all of the different genres I read. From this graph, you can see that the majority of what I read was fantasy. And then the next most common is historical. I feel like it really looks like I read no romance this year, but I think that's a little bit of an error in how I tracked it, because I usually have done it fantasy main category, romance secondary category. And I think we kind of have a debate over which genre is more important. Is it a romance in a fantasy world, or is it a fantasy book with a romance subplot? I feel like, at least for me, the setting really defines my expectations for the story. So I usually do it as a qualifier for the type of romance and then romance as a secondary category. I think I might swap this in the future and do my categories based on if romance is the main category of the book versus just a subplot, which does kind of mean that the data I have across years won't be very comparable, but at the same time, I don't really care that much about that. I wanted to talk really briefly about the new subgenres I really got into this last year. The first one is I read a ton, and I mean a ton, of queer historical romance. I already was reading some books in this genre last year, but I think then I was more so focused on the more even subset of queer historical fantasy romances. And this year I read a lot of queer historical romances that didn't have a fantasy element in them, and I pretty much enjoyed all of the books in that category. So I'm really excited to have kind of branched out and looked at the wider subgenre as a whole. I also feel like this year I really bookended the very start of the year and the end of the year reading a lot of nonfiction, both good and bad nonfiction. But I really enjoyed that, and I honestly want to incorporate more nonfiction in my reading overall, because when it's a topic that I find interesting and the book is well written, I get super into it. I did want to show a couple other graphs from that spreadsheet. The first one is format, which I think is pretty interesting. I feel like this year I didn't read as much audiobooks as I usually do, and I think probably my ebook percentage went up a little bit as well. And the other one I wanted to show you was the audience one. I find this one very interesting, and I feel like it's probably the only time I will ever have all of the major categories represented, since I read from all the categories: children's, middle grade, young adult, new adult, and adult this year, which is definitely very rare. I kind of feel like I should try and read at least one kids book a year just to get that in the categories, since it is kind of cool to say that I've read from pretty much every age range there is. Now I have a couple questions that I found from watching other people's videos that I thought I would answer here. The first one is a question about what is the prettiest book I bought this year. Over the last 2 years, I've gotten more into buying special editions, and I'm only going to include the ones that I also read and have a special edition of. And the one that immediately came to mind is my Illumicrate copy of Jade and Dragons by Amber Chen. I think this book is really beautiful. I love the kind of monochromatic color scheme they went for with it. I love the sprayed edge with the dragon on here. The naked hardcover is really beautiful. I like this artist. I'm pretty sure they did a special edition of Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, and I really like the art style for the end papers. The 2 main characters in this book, they are just so cute. So yes, very happy that I have this one. I'm definitely going to buy the sequel when it comes out from Illumicrate as well, and hopefully it will be just as beautiful as this one. Now let's go ahead and talk about my favorite book as well as my least favorite book. I think by now my favorite books list will be up on my channel, which is basically a list of all of the 5 stars that I had this year. I don't really know what I would consider my favorite book this year. I just feel like overall I didn't have one specific standout book that I loved that is even entering my top favorite books of all time, which is something that definitely happened last year. But I obviously loved all of the 5 stars that I read. In terms of my least favorite book this year, I've had a couple 2 and below star rating books, But I think my least favorite book might also be one of my most disappointing books that I read this year, and that was Mortal Follies by Alexis Hall. This book seemed so up my alley, lesbian historical fantasy romance, but then the execution of this book was just awful. The choice for the narrator to be this like third party character of Puck from Midsummer Night's Dream, who was just incredibly annoying and kind of like voyeuristic in the fact that they were not a member of the main romance, but then also still like a character in the story. It was just very bizarre. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure the sequel to this book also still has them as the narrator, which is really sad because I honestly maybe would have given the second book in the series a chance if it didn't have that gimmick, but I just think it's really bad. And it was such a disappointing read. It was really like pulling teeth for me to get through all of that one. I might in the future check out a different Alexis Hall book, but this series I just feel like it's not for me. Let's quickly talk about my shortest book and the longest book. The shortest book I read was The Little Prince, which is the only children's book I read this year. I don't remember how many pages it is. I want to say under 100. And then the longest book I read this year was The Witching Hour by Anne Rice. I don't remember how many pages this is, but it is a 50-hour audiobook, and I basically have been reading it since mid-October. It took me like 3 months to read the entire thing. I might talk about the book in like a recent reads wrap-up in the future, since I'm not doing a wrap-up for December, but I need to talk about that book to kind of like help get some extra mileage out of the fact that I had to read 50 hours of audiobook. Okay, so now I wanted to do kind of like a general vibe check of how I'm feeling for my reading in 2024. I feel like I didn't have the best year overall. I think I had a very healthy number of books read. Like for most people, like 75 books is a fucking lot of books to read in 1 year. But I don't necessarily think I achieved one of the goals I set out for in wanting to have more like quality over quantity in the books I read, because my average rating is actually lower this year. In 2023, I read 88 books and my average rating was a 3.8. And this year I read 76 books, but my average rating was a 3.75. So not that much lower, but I feel like if I'm going to read less books in a year, I want them to be books I really love and have a higher average rating. I feel like I might like be selling myself short at least a little bit, because over half of the books I read this year were 4 stars and over. But I feel like I said before, the books that I gave 5 stars this year aren't really like cracking into like my top favorite books of all time. Whereas when I look at the books that were like my favorite books of 2023, there was a lot of like not just 5-star books, but like 6-star books in that list. I read Silver Under Nightfall last year, which is like one of my favorite books of all time. I read all of the Hunger Games books last year. I read 2 books in the Locked Tomb series, which has become one of my favorite series of all time. I feel like a lot of the 5 stars I had this year were an emotional journey of like, oh, is this a 5-star? Like halfway through reading it. Whereas the ones last year were like, this is a 5-star, no doubt in my mind, from very early on. So I feel like in that way it is a little bit disappointing. At the same time though, exponential growth is something that's never fully achievable. So even finding books that I am going to consider 5 stars and have be like favorite books of mine in general, even if they're not like all-time top 5 favorite books of all time, is still really good, and I'm glad that I read all of those books. Okay, now let's move ahead and talk about my reading goals for 2025. The first goal is one I pretty much roll over year after year, and that's this year I want to try and read 52 books, which is 1 book a week. Usually I just say 50 books, but I feel like it makes more sense to just do 52, since that's basically what I'm aiming for, to have 1 book a week. And I'm pretty good at reading more than that, so that's kind of an easy one to check off my list. Unless something happens in the middle of the year and I end up falling in like a huge reading slump, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to get this goal done. Going back to something I said before, I really would like to read more nonfiction overall. Maybe try and stick to like 1 a month. Not really holding myself to like a hard standard on that, just in general wanting to read more nonfiction. And overall, I just want to read a ton more queer books like I already do. Even more so now in 2025, when it feels like I really do have the need to prioritize those books. The next goal I have is one I'm going to try and stick to more diligently, and that is I want to do some type of book budget / like low buy for my books. As I feel like I mentioned constantly on this channel, I have like no physical space for books in my apartment. I also feel like I set out in 2024 wanting to do a no buy, but then kind of like failed around like 3 months in. And I did some thinking and kind of like reformulated how I'm going to do a low buy this year. Even though I just said I want to kind of like curb the fact that I have like no space for books in my apartment, my main goal is actually much more like financial. and I just don't want to spend as much money on books as I did last year. I think that overall I'm going to stick to a budget of $240 because that would be if you divide it out one new paperback release a month, and I usually very rarely buy hardback books new. This is also less than half of what I spent on books last year, and instead of doing like a cold turkey no buy, I think this gives me like the flexibility that I needed because I still want the ability to go into independent bookstores and get stuff if I want to, and I really want to prioritize going to indie bookstores in general. Because when I travel, I usually like to check out whatever indie bookstores there are in that city. I think over the course of the year, I might do check-ins for how my low buy is going and kind of like show you what I do end up buying if you guys care about that type of video. And then the fifth goal I have on my list is maybe a little bit counterproductive to what I just said, but I do want to go to more indie bookstores. I really like going to them. I find they're a really good staple location whenever you're checking out a new city to see what indie bookstores are there. And I definitely want to travel, hopefully more in the second half of 2025. I'm really hoping there will be a time this year that I can go to the Ripped Bodice in New York City because I have never been. And obviously I love romance books, and I'm really hoping that they will have a better queer romance section than what you typically see at like a Barnes & Noble. Okay, last section of this video, I want to talk about some kind of like general channel goals / life goals. The first one for my channel is that I really would like to try and hit 1,000 subscribers. I truly have like no idea if this is actually feasible, but it's something I've pretty much always wanted to do on YouTube. So I'm just going to keep on making videos, try maybe to promote them more on like my other social media. And hopefully if you guys enjoy these videos, you can like, comment, and subscribe. Talking about other social media, I would like to try and post on Instagram more. I go on that dang app like every single day, but I'm really bad at remembering to post or like feeling I have enough to say about each photo that I want to post. I feel like I'm really good at prepping for YouTube videos, but I'm really bad at prepping for like photos and for doing like shorts / reels, so I want to get better at doing all of those. I also want to do a couple more series reading vlogs on this channel. I'm definitely going to do one for Heaven Official's Blessing. I want to do one for the Stolen Heir duology. And I'll definitely do more installments of my finishing all of my series that I have in the middle of videos. And I will definitely be doing a Sunrise on the Reaping release day video. I literally have a calendar notification for when that book comes out. I am so excited. And I guess like my last kind of like life goal related to reading is I just kind of want to like chill out. Kind of counterproductive to say that I want to like do all these things and read more books. But at the same time, I feel like in recent like times, as much as I love reading, I kind of feel like I have neglected some of my other hobbies that I really am passionate about because I wasn't super like connected to them at the time. But I'm getting back more into them now. So I want to try to work on having a more happy medium between reading books, both for pleasure as well as for like specific books for this channel, and then also doing like kind of almost completely offline activities that are not for the purpose of me posting them on social media. So yeah, those are all of my goals for 2025. And that is going to be it for this video. If you guys enjoyed this video, consider liking, commenting, or subscribing if you aren't already. Like I said before, I would like to get to 1,000 subscribers. So in addition to doing all that, if you want to share this video with someone else who you think would like my channel, that would also be really great. Consider following me on the Storygraph if you'd like to see my reading updates in real time, as well as my Bookstagram, which is linked in the description. And that is going to be it for me today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!